everyone, it's Clarice. This is Clarice Reads, and today I'm going to talk about the books that I recently read and the books that I'm currently reading. The first book I read since I last put up one of these videos was The Rithmatist by Bryan Sanderson, which is actually the first book in the Rithmatist series, though currently it's the only one out. It follows a regular student named Joel who is basically obsessed with the art, the science, the magic, whatever it is, of rithmatics, and would want nothing more than to be a rithmatist. Rithmatists are people with the ability to use chalk to draw lines that can be used for defense or offense. They can also draw these 2D creatures called chalklings, which essentially are able to come to life on the ground or the surface that they drew them on. There are a lot of specifics to it that I feel like obviously the book is able to explain better, but essentially the concept kind of reminded me at least of like an adult version of Chalk Zone, you know, the TV show from Nickelodeon. I loved that show when I was younger. But anyway, life for Joel at the beginning of the book is pretty normal, albeit kind of sad, until suddenly rhythmatic students start disappearing out of nowhere and Joel finds himself kind of caught up in that case. I really enjoyed this book, which is no surprise because it's written by Bryan Sanderson, and Sanderson can do no wrong. The magic system here is pretty intricate. There are a lot of different rules to them, and because of that I feel like it makes the magic system feel even more real and more tangible. Bryan Sanderson is just really good at making his magic systems, but also his worlds just feel so real and again, tangible. Here the world was actually fleshed out even more because of the role that religion and history played in it. This fictional religion and history of this place does play a part in all the events that are happening. So it doesn't feel like these things that are happening just got plucked out of the mind of Bryan Sanderson. It feels like it came from an actual real world. While I'm reading a book, I try to predict what will happen, and I actually totally called the plan that the antagonist had. I was also able to predict a couple of other details of the plot, but overall, I just love how it's a young adult book, but it's also a really smart book, which is unfortunately not a combination I read as much as I would like to. As a sort of side note, I feel like this is also a novel that is very visual, not just in the sense that it does have pictures in it, because it does have pictures in it, but also in the sense that while you're reading words, it's really easy to visualize what it actually looks like in your head. So overall, like I said, I really like this book. I have yet to find a Bryan Sanderson book that I wasn't impressed by, and I do look forward to reading more Bryan Sanderson and reading more of The Rithmatist when the second book does come out. The next book I read was Colorless, Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage by Haruki Murakami, which is the first Haruki Murakami book that I've read, and it probably will not be the last. It follows a guy named Tsukuru Tazaki who once upon a time was part of this group of really close friends, until one day his friends just suddenly cut him off the group with no explanation. Decades later, he still doesn't know the reason why all of this happened, and while he thinks that he's accepted it, he soon realizes that he hasn't truly moved on. This book follows his life after his friends left him, as well as after he realizes that he needs to go on this journey to achieve some sort of closure. The experience of reading Murakami book was very different from most of the other books that I read. It's weird because events in it weren't technically magical, but they felt sort of surreal at the same time. And most of the plot elements just come up and their significance isn't really explained to you, but they're just left for you to sort of think about and reflect on. So this isn't the sort of book you should read if you do want a clear resolution about everything, because you're not going to get it. And luckily that's not what I expected from this book, because I don't think this is a book that you read for the plot anyway. There were parts of this book that was a pleasure for me to read simply because of the way that it was written, or because of what it could say about life and about people and just what it made me think about. There were times that I read a passage and I just had to stop and think, wow, that was beautiful. I think in the future I'm going to have to be in a certain mood to read Murakami, though I definitely plan to eventually read more of his books, and I'm so glad that I picked this up and I read this one. The next book I read was The Secret Loves of Geek Girls, edited by Nicholson, but with stories written by a bunch of different female writers. It's basically a collection of non-fiction stories written by a bunch of different geek girls, mainly about their love life and romance and that sort of thing. The stories come in a lot of different formats. Some of them are written in just words, some of them are written as comics, some of them include beautiful illustrations to go along with them, and they're written by all sorts of people. It includes cosplayers, gamers, fanfic writers, book readers, comic book readers, also involves different sexualities, different races, and it also includes lots of happy love stories, some sad ones, some bittersweet ones. As someone who took up computer science, is obsessed with books and comic books, and even every now and then really gets into a video game, I could definitely relate to this, but it was also very cute and very honest. It's just such a charming book, and I'm glad that I read it. And the last thing I finished reading was the entire Scott Pilgrim series by Bryan Lee O'Malley. This is a series that follows a boy named Scott Pilgrim, though technically he's an adult, but he kind of acts like a boy. Anyway, Scott Pilgrim starts dating a girl named Ramona Flowers, and then soon realizes that in order to keep dating her, he has to fight off her 7 evil exes. I've actually owned these first 2 books for a couple of years now, and I keep telling myself I'm gonna finish that series one of these days, but I'm always super hesitant to buy the next books in this series because these color editions are pretty expensive, and I wasn't sure if I liked the series enough to buy them. Once I even reread both of them with the intention of continuing the series, and then I never did. Recently all the books are on sale, so I figured I might as well just finally finish this series. So I reread these 2 books, I read the other ones digitally, I finished this series. I read it in like 2 days. In these first 2 books especially, Scott Pilgrim is kind of a jerk. And that's what frustrated me about it. When I reread it, I actually realized it was kind of okay because it's not like people aren't calling him out on being a jerk. And then later on I found out that there's actually some sort of character development. They just don't leave him like that and think that it's okay. So while I was kind of iffy about these first 2 books, I did like how the series progressed, and I think my favorite book in the series was the last one, just because it dealt with some of the problems I had in the beginning. That being said, my favorite parts of these books weren't like the character development or the plot or anything. It's just how fun they were, especially in terms of how they make use of like weird video game stuff and incorporate it into the real world the way that they do in a kind of nonchalant way. You know, small things like how whenever he defeated one of the evil exes, he would get coins, you know, like from a video game, and at one point, you know, he would get like an extra life, or he would get an item and it would like talk about his stats and stuff, and it was just really fun, and those are the parts that I enjoyed from it the most. It isn't my favorite comic book series, but it was really fun being able to read it all straight. It's kind of absurd, kind of doesn't make sense sometimes, but I enjoyed reading it. I found the art cute, and I'm glad I finally finished the series. So those are all the books that I recently read. Currently I'm technically in the middle of a lot of things because in the last months I've just been starting a lot of books and not really continuing them. So I won't mention all of them, but the book, or I guess the series that I'm actually actively reading currently is Preacher. It's a comic book series that is hard to explain, but it has a lot to do with religion. If you're really sensitive about religion, you might find it kind of blasphemous, but I know that it's just a comic, you know, and it's really interesting and gory and graphic, and yes, kind of blasphemous sometimes. Reading this series is one of those things like finishing Scott Pilgrim that I'm always putting off, even though I always know that I want to do it. And then all the Preacher books were on sale. Again, like with Scott Pilgrim, so I figured I'll just do it. And I'm reading it, and I have very high expectations for the rest of it because a lot of people have this as kind of their favorite comic book series. So far, I have finished book 1, and I'm currently at book 2. So we'll see how this goes. So that's what I'm currently reading. Feel free to tell me what you've been reading recently, especially if you've read anything really good. I always love getting book recommendations, even though I don't have the time to read all the books that I want to read. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!